I'm preaching on one of my favorite passages this morning, John 21, verses 15 to 17. It's one of those passages that it just hits me every time. It convicts me, and I can't really read it and meditate on it without drawing tears to my eyes and praying to the Lord, Lord, I'm sorry. Lord, help me. I think this passage is very important for us Christians. It gives us disciples a goal to strive for. It gives the church a motto, to love the Lord. If there was ever a person who understood what it means to grow spiritually, it was Peter. If you read the gospel story, you see Peter as a man of impulse, a rushing, impetuous type of a man, like a mountain stream hurrying over the rocks on the way to the valley. He was quick on the trigger. Where his feelings went, he followed. His reactions came in spurts. He moved first and thought later. Peter asked questions. He pointed things out. He always spoke up. And there were times, though, when he would say things without thinking. Many times Peter made mistakes. He said things that were wrong, he made the wrong choices, and he just leaves you with the impression that he likes the taste of his toes with how often his foot was in his mouth. He had a tendency to just be so overconfident when danger is near, and he had a tendency to overlook his master's warnings. He rushed ahead when he should have waited. He slept when he should have prayed. He talked when he should have listened. He fought when he should have stayed still. He was courageous, but he was also careless. And some people may have seen the impulsivity and the instability in Peter, but Jesus saw something more. You see, in Jesus' eyes, he was a piece of marble that in the right hands could be chiseled down into a masterpiece. Jesus saw his strength. Peter could make up his mind and act promptly, even in the face of danger. While others were still thinking it over and mulling it over in their heads, Peter was already doing. He wasn't even talking about it. He acted with certainty. And so Jesus saw Peter with a net in his hands, and he said, "Follow me, I'm going to make you a fisher of men." And Peter had been catching fish, and he decided to drop his net and immediately follow the Lord, where he would catch men in service to God. Peter would spend all day fishing with skill and patience and often confronting the dangers of storms. Jesus called him to spend all day catching people with skill and patience, enduring the dangers of persecution. The fishermen often worked in an unseen world below the surface, and Peter, as an apostle, did the same. That same impulsiveness that you could criticize Peter for was also this great virtue in answering the call of Jesus. He didn't think it over. He didn't ask to take time to care for his family. He didn't weigh all the different options that might make him hesitate. Instead, he went forward and answered the call of Jesus. You know, with some people, you might have seen Peter's impulsiveness to be instability. And Jesus looked at Peter and he saw the opposite. He saw that he had the potential to be stable, the potential to be dependable, someone you could rely on. And that's when Jesus, he met Simon, and he gave him the name Peter, which means rock. And there were so many times in his life whenever he really didn't measure up to that name, where he wasn't the rock that people needed. He wasn't the person that people could depend on. Sure, when he was walking on water and then he sunk like a rock, but most of the time he wasn't that dependable rock. But Jesus saw in him he had the potential. This impulsive person, he had the ability to make up his mind quickly. He had the ability to have all of his priorities already decided. He had the ability to have no room for doubt. He was a man of courage. He was the one who walked on the waters towards Jesus. No other disciple wanted to walk on the waters. He voiced his loyalty to Jesus. When Jesus said, "Are you going to leave me?" Peter was the one that said, "Where are we going to go? You're the one that has the words of eternal life. When Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? Who do you think I am? Peter was the one who identified Jesus dead on the target. He said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter was a family man. He worked with his brother, Andrew, fishing. He had a wife and a mother-in-law that he cared for. He'd spend his days fishing to care for his family. And Jesus called him to spend his days fishing for people, to care for his Christian family. As a father and a husband, he would work hard to care for his family. And as an apostle, he would work hard to take care of his spiritual family. And out of all the disciples, I think Peter understood God's grace the most. Because it was Peter who denied the Lord not once, not twice, but 3 times. It was that great blunder that the Lord forgave and still loved him. The grace of God worked in Peter to mold his character. It was God's love that transformed Peter from impulsive to quick acting, from reckless to courageous, from controlling to leading, from prideful to confident. Peter went from being this hardened blue-collar fisherman to a preacher and an ambassador for God's grace. And when you read the book of Acts, you see a completely different Peter. You see Peter not being impetuous and immature. The Lord was resurrected. He met with Peter and Jesus ascended. And after Peter saw the Lord resurrected, the gospel truth reinforced his heart. He matured. And in every situation, you see Peter without his defects. He's quick acting, courageous, leading, and confident. Because it was through the Lord's love, the Spirit's power, that Peter was able to grow so much and to be the person that Jesus knew he could be. And when you look at John 21, I think that was the turning point for Jesus. This is where Jesus and Peter are having a heart-to-heart, and the disciples are very likely right there with them. This is after Peter had denied Jesus. And Peter, with that still same guilt upon his heart, he meets Jesus after Jesus was crucified and resurrected. Jesus forgives Peter, and Jesus spends time eating a meal with Peter after he had been resurrected. And I want to look at this because it's such a turning point in Peter's life. And every time I read this passage, I feel like Peter. I feel like I'm someone that has a lot of room to grow. I feel like I'm someone who's got sure, there's some potential there. The Lord can make great things out of not so great things. I just read this passage and I realize that before you can grow, you got to learn that you need to grow. John 21. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, what are the these? This is in this circumstance. I mean, is he saying, do you love me more than these people? Do you love me more than the others, disciples? Do you love the disciples more than me? Do you love me or the disciples more? That could be it. It could mean, Peter, do you love me more than the boats, the nets, the fish we just ate? Do you love me more than your trade? Between your trade of fishing and as a fisherman, or between me, which one do you love more? Or is he saying, Peter, do you love me more than the other disciples? Do you think that between you and the other disciples, you love me the most? Do you love me more than all the other disciples? I think that one might be it. This is right after Jesus was crucified. Remember the context. Remember the background of how Jesus said he was going to be denied, and Peter looked at Jesus and said, Jesus, I'm never going to deny you. Oh, they may deny you. He points to his other disciples. Yeah, they may deny you. He's just throwing them under the bus. Oh, they'll deny you, but I'm not going to deny you because I love you more than the rest of them. And Jesus said, yeah, you're going to deny me 3 times when the rooster crows. And that low point where Peter, he thinks he's at the pinnacle, right? He thinks he loves the Lord as much as he can, and he is brought so low whenever he denies Jesus. And so maybe Jesus is bringing it back. Like, you remember you said you weren't going to deny me even though all these other people denied me. Do you think you love me more than they do? The conversation goes this way. And we're going to walk through the conversation several times. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." This is the moment when Peter realizes he needs to grow in his love to the Lord. And I'm going to add some nuance to this passage. This is one of the few passages that I think where you really need to know the Greek to understand what's really happening here. If you don't know the Greek, it's still okay. It's still a very powerful passage. But here, in our English language, we don't have too many variations on the word love. But in the Greek language, there are multiple variations of the word love that's often translated to that one word love. And there are two Greek words here for love. One of them you're probably going to recognize. So you have agape and phileo, right? And so agape is this sacrificial, unconditional love. When Jesus says, "I want you to love one another as I have loved you," he's using agape. This is a deep kind of love. It is the kind of love that really was popularized by Jesus. He came and used this word predominantly. The word phileo was common, though. It is a love between brothers, a love of friends. You hear it in the word Philadelphia, which means love between brothers. And so it's a love between people who have some sort of connection. Now, there are times whenever in the Greek I do think that the word agape is greater than the word phileo. And when we come to John 21, you're going to see both versions of the word used very specifically. And like I said, I'm going to walk through this passage several times. If you don't catch it the first time, you'll see it on the third time, okay? Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you agape love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord. You know that I phileo love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you agape love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord. You know that I phileo love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John," notice the switch, "do you phileo love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you phileo love me?" He said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I phileo love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." You'll notice the different uses. Jesus asked, "Do you agape me?" Peter said, "I phileo you." Jesus said, "No, I'm asking, do you agape me?" Peter said, "No, I phileo you." And then Jesus said, "Do you phileo me?" And Peter says, "I phileo you." Let me translate it a little bit. See, Jesus is asking, do you love me to the greatest extent that you can? Do you love me so much that you would sacrifice for me? Do you love me unconditionally? And Peter, he replies with a lesser word. He's like, "Oh, you know I love you a lot." Jesus said, No, I'm not asking if you love me a lot. I'm asking, do you love me unconditionally? And Jesus repeats the question. Peter answers the same way. Then Jesus uses Peter's word, and that's when Peter understands. Let me go through it one more time. "Simon, son of John, do you unconditionally love me more than these?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you a lot." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." And he said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you unconditionally love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you a lot." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you just love me a lot?" Peter was grieved because he said to him, "Do you love me a lot?" And Peter said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I only love you a lot. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Jesus wants Peter to love him as much as he can. And Peter thought he did. Peter was willing to die for Jesus in the garden. You remember whenever Jesus was arrested and whenever Judas came and kissed him on the cheek? And all those guards, all those soldiers with their armor and their weapons. And what does Peter do? Does he cower? No, not Peter. He pulls out his sword and he goes to swinging. He understood. They were outnumbered and they were outmatched. Peter was willing to die for Jesus right then and right there. He pulled out his sword and he was ready to die for the Lord. But Jesus stopped him. You see, immediately after Peter put his life on the line for Jesus, he's standing around a fire, and a couple people said, hey, aren't you the guy that's friends with Jesus? Peter says, no. He's like, no, you're the guy who's friends with Jesus. He's like, no, you're the guy who's friends with Jesus. He says, I don't know the man. Going from the guy who pulls out a sword, ready to die for the Lord, to the guy who's like, no, I don't know him. Because Peter, it's easier to die sometimes than to live. Dying for the Lord is easy. Make a one-time choice. Living for the Lord is harder. Peter was willing to get sliced by a sword, but he was not willing to be looked down upon. Like I said, Peter thought he was at the pinnacle. He thought, I love the Lord more than anyone else. Now they'll deny you, but I won't deny you. I will die for you, Lord. I'll pull out my sword and I will die. But he has to come to realize, Peter, you have room to grow. And Jesus, he says, do you love me? Oh yeah, I love you. No. Do you love me? It's like, yeah, I love you. Do you love me? Peter says, oh. Jesus says, do you love me unconditionally? He's like, yeah, I love you a lot. No. Do you love me unconditionally? Oh, you know I love you a lot. Peter, do you just love me a lot? And even Peter, at the very end, he says, this is just this admission, this confession, where he realizes, I don't love you like I should. I love you a lot, but not unconditional. He was pierced in the heart. He was confident. He was faithful. He was prideful. He viewed himself as 100% committed. He thought there was no more commitment than I could give. And it's only when he saw that he needed to grow that he could grow. And so each time in response to Peter's love, Jesus says, feed my sheep. Jesus gives Peter this responsibility. He says, if you love me, show me by doing it. Jesus said, John 14:15, if you love me, keep my commandments. This is something we all need to admit. And I read this passage, and I feel like Peter, and my heart is just breaking, and I realize I am the same way sometimes. I think, I love the Lord as much as I could. I'm giving him everything. Jesus looks me in the eyes, but do you love me? Do you love me? It's like, oh, I love you a lot, Jesus. No. Do you love me unconditionally? Well, I mean, I know. Do you love me unconditionally? I just shrug my shoulders. You know me, Lord. I don't, but I should. We have to admit, our love is not as great as it should be. Peter learned his lesson, and he needed to grow. And when he was in the book of Acts, he acted like a completely different person. Not that he was perfect by any means, but he was still confident, not brash or impulsive. He looked the Jewish leaders in the eye, even though it could have killed them, and he said, "We will not back down." He still has his moments, but he has grown so much. And then you read his letter. He's got 2 Peter. 2 Peter is all about growth. And if there's anyone that knew what it meant to grow, it's Peter. And he talks about God's power within us and learning to grow and learning to take on the nature of God. He talks about building on your faith. He says, here's all these virtues, this virtue, then this virtue, then this virtue, then this virtue. And they all lead up to this last one that is the most important, right? He says, for this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, your virtue with knowledge, your knowledge with self-control, your self-control with steadfastness, steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection. Notice the pinnacle. And brotherly affection with love. And we find those two Greek words at the same time. You have Philadelphia, you have phileo and agape. Peter, in his second letter, he comes to understand, yeah, I was just at that phileo level. I needed to be at that agape level. And in this letter, he says, as you're building and as you're growing in the Lord, there's going to come a point where you get to that brotherly affection level, but you still have room to get to that unconditional love. In John 21, he had to learn that he had not reached the pinnacle of growth, that he had more room to grow, and that as every disciple, we must strive to love the Lord like he loved us. I think of this passage and I come away with guilt, but also with a goal. Knowing that the Lord forgives me when I don't love him enough, but that I want to love him because of everything the Lord has done for us, right? Because the Lord sacrificed himself. Because everything, that he abandoned the splendor of majesty in heaven, that he became a human, that he would live that lowly life to the point that he would even die as a traitor, that he would be treated so poorly despite the fact that he was King of Kings. That love is deeper than we could ever imagine. But I'm like Peter. I feel that question cut into me. Do you love me? Do you love me? Yeah. Not as much as I should. It hurts to know that I don't love Jesus as much as I should. And I walk away from this passage praying to God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I don't love you as much as I should. I'm going to try to do more. But I feel like Peter. I love you a lot, but not enough. Thank you for loving me. I say to the Lord like Peter said to the Lord, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you a lot when I should love you unconditionally. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to tend the sheep. I'm going to love and care for God's people. I'm going to obey the Lord's commands. And I'm going to try to love the Lord as much as possible. And I'm going to try to grow. And I'm going to let the Lord work in me. And I'm going to accept I am not at the pinnacle as I ought to be. I'm going to accept I am not where I should be. I'm going to accept that I have room to grow. And I'm just going to let Jesus lead the way. Because I love him. In this lesson, I just wanted to make you put yourself in Peter's shoes. Hear Jesus' question, do you love me? Do you love me a lot? Do you love me unconditionally? How are you going to answer? Are you going to be like Peter and admit, I got room to grow. I love you, Lord, but not as much as I should.